Welcome to the AtlantECO podcast, where we talk about the science behind the AtlantECO project, the Atlantic Ocean, and the human adventures experienced along the way. Here, we have conversations with guests from around the world who work together so that we can better understand, manage, and protect the ocean. So let's embark on the journey of AtlantECO and discover the world that lies above and beneath the surface of the beautiful Atlantic Ocean. Welcome back to the AtlantECO podcast. In our episode today, we are learning about another research and innovation project, which is contributing to developing knowledge, resources, and solutions so that we can achieve better management and understanding of the ocean. And our guest today is Tosta Tanua, the coordinator of the EuroSea project, which is funded under the Horizon 2020 program of the European Union. So let's get chatting. Tosta, hi, and welcome to the AtlantECO podcast.
Thank you, Eloise. That's great to be here. And I just want to, I'm sorry, but I have to correct you. EuroSea is an innovation action. It's not a research and innovation action. It's slightly different.
Oh, right. Yeah. So yeah, an innovation action, which is slightly more advanced to the research and innovation action. So you're targeting like real world application already. But I guess we'll learn about that later on in the show.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And before we dive into the topic of EuroSea, and as we do with each episode, actually, we like to get to know our guest a little bit more. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about yourself and how and where your connection to the ocean started. And maybe you can tell us about your journey and what has led you to do what you do today.
Thank you, Eloise. That's a good start. So I'm born and raised in Sweden on the Baltic Sea coast. Always sort of connected to the sea. The Baltic Sea, I mean, when you grew up, that was the biggest thing. And it was hard to imagine that one day I would be crossing the Atlantic and other oceans, because that seemed very far away. But I grew a very fond love, I guess, of being out at the sea and swimming, sailing. Sailing has always been part of me. I grew up sailing. And eventually I took up diving and worked as a diver for a while as well. So very intense relationship with the ocean. And as being a natural scientist, or actually being very interested in nature, put it that way, I decided to do a natural science career. Initially, I wanted to be a biologist, but I realized that's probably impossible to get a job as a biologist. So I said, chemistry is good enough. And in the end, I realized that there is a possibility to do marine chemistry. And that's kind of how I bumped into being, doing marine science and doing marine chemistry. And now I do what I call chemical oceanography, which is pretty much the same thing, but maybe not quite. So, things are happening by chance. And I've taught in university. This is a great chance to combine my passion for the ocean and doing some chemistry, which I also like a lot.
Yeah, sounds like the greatest way of them all, when you can combine your passion with your work and contribute to something that is dear to your heart.
Yeah, that's right. And then I got this PhD position, and I started to write my PhD, and I bought the sailboat, and I lived on the sailboat when I did my PhD, and then I sailed my boat to California for doing my postdoc. Yeah, so, I still have the boat, and we, eventually sailed it back after 15 years in the Pacific. So that's still, taking my family, my kids out on that same journey in a way. They also love sailing, either Pacific or even the Baltic.
That sounds amazing, and a great journey. And before we get into more details about the EuroSea project itself, I would like to get to know more about the context and the specific challenges within which you're working. So could you tell us what the needs behind the projects are?
So EuroSea is all about creating an ocean observing and forecasting system in an international context. And in the background for that is there's a need for society in general to understand and have ocean information. The ocean impacts us all, even though we maybe not think so. It impacts our weather, our seasons, all kind of things. And, we get livelihood, we get food from the ocean. Goods are transported on the ocean. It's important for security. But in the same time, even though we have a lot of research infrastructure and research going on in the ocean in Europe for many projects and institutes, these are science. These are mostly, to a large part, I would say, curiosity and basic research understanding of the ocean. It's poorly set up to deliver regular information of the ocean to society and stakeholders like aquaculture and offshore industry and so on. I mean, maybe I would like to take the analogy of metrology. So metrology is also about the same, a couple of 100 years old, but it grew from a very different perspective. It grew up because we really would like to know what the weather is going to be tomorrow. And maybe the day after tomorrow, and now you can talk about the weather for 10 days in the future, and we have a reasonable, we believe that weather in some extent, right? So it came up from a very much more of an operational background, and it was really useful to know what the weather is going to be tomorrow in the next few days. Whereas in the ocean, we didn't see that connection to that need. It was more of ocean is out there, it's big, and let's try to figure out how it works. So I think now the need is for society to turn the tide a little bit on that and create a little bit more of sustained infrastructure that is set up to deliver that information. It's really hard to deliver that information on a sustained base if you're funded by short-term research projects. So in the ocean, 70% of the observations that we do are funded by short-term research projects, whereas in metrology, it's actually the other way around. It's only 30% that's short-term and 70% long-term. So what we're trying to do is set up the basics, the infrastructure, the coordination, the support structures for ocean observing. And we're not interested in observing by itself, right? The value chain is such that we want to deliver some information. It could be forecast, it could be a state assessment or things like that on a regular basis. So that is really the background, I think, on why ocean observing and forecasting is needed, and that's why EuroSea came about.
Yeah, so we need the same kind of infrastructure that we have for weather forecasting in the sea, and I guess you're going to explain how this is done in EuroSea, how you are helping to achieve these objectives, and maybe you can tell us what your project is about and what you're aiming for.
Yeah, so EuroSea is about ocean observing and forecasting and creating an European system for that. But we're also looking at putting that in international context. I mean, there is one ocean, it's the same ocean that's around the world. So we're working very closely with international partners to make sure that we don't create any standards and system in Europe that is not interoperable with the international system. And in fact, EuroSea is supporting the international structure in the support we have. And in the end, what we want to do is to deliver ocean observation and forecast for society. And it's about knowledge. The ocean is very important for climate, for instance, very, actual right now when we have the COP negotiations happening as we speak. But there's also marine ecosystem, biodiversity, and also how vulnerable the ecosystems and biodiversity is to impact of human activities. So that's another goal. And maybe the third goal here is to demonstrate the importance of the ocean to society and people. Many people don't really think about the ocean. They may live a little bit away from the ocean and don't see ocean every day. And I think there's a great quote from some of our NOAA US colleagues. What they say is that if you like your weather forecast, thank an oceanographer.
Yeah. Okay.
And this really tells you. I mean, I think for the next day you're probably fine, without oceanography. But if you want to know what the weather is going to be now for the weekend, now we have a Wednesday morning. So if I want to know what I can do on Saturday, I really have to be thankful for the oceanographers that deliver the ocean information and temperature information and stuff like that goes into these forecasts. I think you can say many things about EuroSea, what we try to do, but these are the three kind of main goals. And the way we try to address that in EuroSea is to have a couple of work packages. I mean, in a project like EuroSea, you have to divide it in work packages and tasks to get some structure in it. But one part of ERC is then that backbone, the international coordination, agreements on best practices, how you do things. In metrology, for instance, you have standards. You have to do it very carefully in a particular way to have a data that can go into the data system. And in oceanography, we're a little bit more fluid, I think. We could be more stringent and make sure that we know what we measure and so on. There's also about design. You have an observing system. You need to think about how and where and when you do observe and what. So you have to design the system a little bit to be fit for purpose. And that's, of course, a slightly difficult thing to do because the design is going to be slightly different if you look for climate effects or if you look for, something that's important for fisheries or so on. So the idea is to integrate these things. So integration is very important. How can we integrate our efforts and how can we integrate the needs of science to the need of an ocean observing system? So we can, create synergy and get more bang for the buck, if you like. We can get more out of the efforts, the investments that we do. And then there is also the coordination of networks. In the ocean observing, we talk about networks. So these are typically a group of operators that operate a particular platform that comes together and decide on and agree on data formats and design and things like that. So the networks are a cycle around platforms like Argo floats. These are really good floats that, bob around in the ocean and every 10 days they dive down to 2,000 meters and go up to the surface and do measurements and then send the data away by satellites. So that is a typical network. So there's a group of people that coordinate this network and agree on the future and how many there should be and so on. Right. So right now there's about 4,000 of these floats floating around in the ocean. They are very important for understanding climate and also to understand weather. And there are other networks. We have underwater gliders, for instance. So these are robots that by changing the buoyancy can do a jigsaw kind of pattern in the ocean. And every couple of hours they come up to the surface and send the data back. So we have a number of these networks, and they are all in different TRL, technological readiness level, if you like. They are more and more advanced. So depending on where they are on that TRL scale, we support them with different things to improve and be more of a mature system. Because what we really need is these mature systems. They are, sustained funded and they have a, support structure and data delivery structure and everything that goes into that.
Yeah, so that they can carry on, after the funding has gone, they can carry on providing that very important data.
Exactly. I mean, ERC doesn't have much in terms of funding for having new floats or gliders in the water, but we have the funds to create that glue, if you like, the glue that ties these different actors, different institutes and different nations together to improve and increase the impact of these measurements. So that is what we do.
So very important indeed. I mean, you started the project in November 2019. So that was 3 years ago. And 3 years later, where are you at? Can you maybe share with us a few results?
Yeah, sure. We do have quite a lot of things that's been happening. I mean, I think we had done a lot of progress in for instance, of improving that coordination that I just talked about. One item that has a lot of attention is the marine litter, plastic in the ocean. A lot of efforts going on of observing and modeling that, but there hasn't been any international coordination of these observing activities. So we have started what we call IMDOS, Integrated Marine Debris Observing System. So that is a result of ERC and our partners. Of course, we not do that in a vacuum. We are talking to international community, and we have agreed on a structure for better coordination of marine debris. We are working a lot on what we call EOS, the European Ocean Observing System, which is something that is developing, I would say, that will be important for Europe to coordinate the different observing activities within Europe. ERC has provided a lot of funds and support for some activities there, and we hope that EOS can grow and be that coordinating body on the long term within Europe. So that is ongoing work. There is a committee here on operations where all the nations are sitting together and trying to coordinate activities and resource investments in ocean observing. We have this one work package that works on forecasting, and we're particularly looking at the seasonal forecasting. We have been able to integrate new observations into this seasonal forecasting and demonstrate the value of having these extra observations for seasonal forecasting. So I think by EuroSea, we will have slightly better seasonal forecasting in Europe and maybe worldwide even. Something that is also very important is the data delivery, of course. We're talking about FAIR data. So this is an acronym. It means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. So that is a basic principle, technological principle on how data should be. Once you have them, other people can use them. And another thing that we add to that is open and free. Data can be fair, but you still have to pay for them. So we are working a lot on delivering the data from our networks in that technological fair way. And we are working on new time series, new products on biogeochemistry. In particular, we're looking at importing ocean carbon data products that are up and running but need continuous support. So we have been able to support the release of a couple new products. And the new thing we're working on is ship-based time series, data product for ship-based time series. So these are really important data, So people are going out with a ship once a month or every couple of weeks or every couple of months to a place in the ocean and make observations. And some people have been doing that for many decades. When you look at that afterwards, you see how important that is to understand changes in the ocean. We're trying to get this community together and create a data product so you can easily compare the results from one time series station in one part of the world to another one.
Yeah, so I guess up to now, maybe this wasn't done and people were measuring maybe different things or the same things, but in different ways, and therefore you couldn't compare this sort of data. Is this what you found out, or?
Yes, some of that is true. Some of that, we are not the first one that coordinate time series efforts. So there has been coordination efforts, but it's still so that if to access this data, you have to go to the database for that particular time series, then another one, and then the third one, and they all have slightly different formats and different data structure and so on. So even though you can access them, you have to spend a lot of time to get the data in that format so you can actually do that comparison. So I think the individual time series, they're working hard to follow, best community practice on how to measure, and they measure what they can, mostly what they have funds to do and so on. But still, the data delivery is sitting on one particular website, and sometimes it's easy to access, sometimes it's not so easy. So we're trying to create that product. Data products is, I think, a very important part when we have a very diverse data landscape. So these are some of the things that we're doing in that basic backbone structure for coordination and support. Another half of EuroSea is what we call demonstrators. So we have quite a lot of resources in free demonstrators that try to demonstrate and devise products, I would say, for either climate services or ocean health services or operational services. And all of them have already delivered a lot of good products. So let me tell you about a product we have developed for sea level planning purposes. Our partners in the UK has developed a tool, and they apply that on the city of Hull in England, which is a low-lying city and prone to flooding and coastal inundation, and sometimes with very large, economical costs of these flooding events. And now you put that in a context of the sea level rise due to climate and potentially different storm patterns that drive storm surges. So you can able to map the different scenarios of sea level rise depending on, how we do an emission and how that will drive sea level. And then you can map that on that community to a very small, high detailed scale in individual street blocks. And you know what kind of assets do you have there, how many people are going to be affected, what is the elevation and so on. Then so that tool then provides, some information for the planners of that city of Hull. So they can see in this scenario, in 50 years, the damage is likely going to be this high. And you can compare that to the investment in measures like dikes and so on to prevent these damages to happen. Or you may want to remove settlements to other places and stuff like that. So it provides that tool in a very easy to use way for city planners. So these are things that I think is really interesting for climate adaptation.
And is it easy to maybe replicate for, I guess the aim is not to stay within one city, but to be able to replicate that around the world in different places?
Exactly. That is the aim of an innovation action like we are. We are developing a prototype, and then you have private companies that have developed that and are able to adapt that to other cities and making revenue of that. So one part of the having an innovation action is that you are aiming of developing products and services that have a commercial impact or maybe monetary impact for society. So that is one typical thing. And we hope that, other cities will come and say, well, we also have a low laying city here. Can't we just, get the hydrodynamic and model and so on for our city? And we're also developing services for communities and ports in terms of understanding where, any oil spill or, man overboard maneuvers, basically downscaling and model to very fine grid around the city and the community beaches and so on. Something that we just released in a version for Barcelona. So that's again, we have some observational units there. We're measuring, waves and sea level. And then we put that in the context of a model. And then we have a tool for the operators of the city to understand much better how to handle, normal day shipping, but also if accidents or incidents are happening.
Yeah, so that one might be more for, it can be for city planners, but also for first responders or these kind of things.
Absolutely. So you can imagine somebody swimming out and getting into trouble, or windsurfer, or somebody falling off the ship. And then you can add that particular point where they fell in the water and put that in a drift model. And you can have a good estimation on that person going to be drifting to the north or the south, right? And where to concentrate your search efforts.
Yeah, so very useful indeed.
I think there are many examples like that. When you talk about ocean health, we have been working with, for instance, the HELCOM, so the Helsinki Convention, looking at Baltic and the Baltic observing system, which is slightly two different things. Well, HELCOM work on a longer time scale, looking at ecosystem impact, and BOOS, the Baltic Ocean Observing System, are looking at more operational. So we've been able to merge these two communities, I think, for the benefit of both of them. That is really useful for reporting to HELCOM, and also useful for the states around the Baltic when they are designing, fishery quota. And this doesn't really imply any new assets in the water. It only implies a little bit better coordination of existing structures.
Yes, so utilizing structures, tools, resources that already exist, but making sure they communicate with each other so that they can complement their efforts.
Yeah, it's also a matter of trust, I think. For a commission that works under very strict rules and have been doing things like they have done for many, many years, to adapt and trust, modelers and new instruments that can be supportive of their objectives. So it's about the conversation of building trust.
Yeah, and that can take some time to achieve, I guess. So the project still has a year to run. It will end next year in December 2023. So what is still to happen and what will happen once the project is over?
The last year is easy, I think. We have a lot of things in the pipeline, many things that are in the pipeline, and people have building up different services and products that we will release within the next year. Something about indicators, for instance, ocean indicators. Sometimes it's very hard for a wider audience and stakeholders and policymakers to understand complicated data graphs, right? But you can indicators is something that's really useful. So we're working on climate indicators, but I think generally in the project has been a little bit slowed down a little bit because of the COVID-19 pandemic, like everything else. And our project started just before the outbreak of the pandemic. Things are, pushed a little bit to the last year here in terms of delivery. I think we'll be able to deliver everything we promised, but it's going to be more focused on the last year as people are able to travel and we're able to actually deploy some of the hardware in the water. So I'm looking forward to that a lot. I mean, one thing I would like to state maybe is that we're going to have a final conference in Paris in September 2023. I hope we can have a big audience for that, and in particular one day there where we invite a larger audience on talking about the progress of EuroSea and the way forward. So we are still kind of exploring ways we can move forward, and the partnership for sustainable blue economy is something that could be interesting for us. I mentioned in the beginning how we need to have that transfer from a purely science-driven observing system or a more system-driven by societal needs, which maybe imply funding and support from more funders than our research ministries and DD research. And so I think that is something that we are working on. And, there are some movements within Europe and other countries towards that, but it takes a long time. So one thing that we put a lot of hope on is the development and some resourcing for EOS, the European Ocean Observing System, that should have the power within Europe to coordinate activities.
So still a lot of things to happen. I mean, usually in these projects, the last year is filled with everything to be wrapped up and all the last deliverables, the last report. So I have to wish you a lot of luck for that last year of work that is coming your way. And if people want to know more about the project, about all these activities, these products, because I'm sure there's even more than you've been able to mention. So how can they keep up to date with what you're doing and what is happening?
The one easy way is, of course, to go to our website, eurosea.eu. You can find a lot of information on what we're doing, and you can find information about what we have delivered and output and impact of EuroSea. Another way to engage here is to attend our anniversary webinars. This is something that we started after the first year of EuroSea when we realized everybody's in lockdown. There's no way we're going to be able to meet. So we had these webinars, 2-hour webinars. But you're going to find information on that if you go to the website.
So will that anniversary be recorded?
Yeah, it's typically recorded. Yeah, should be. So that's like a podcast in a way, so one can go in there and look at it afterwards. We have a YouTube channel. We have some videos and things there. You can all find that on the website.
Yeah, we'll put all the links to the different channels so people can access them directly when they listen to this episode and want to learn more about EuroSea. So Toast, I have to thank you for taking the time to talk to us about EuroSea today. It's been a pleasure. I want to learn more about everything that you've done, so I'll go and check out those videos you've mentioned. And thank you again.
Thank you, Eloise, for having me. It has been my pleasure to talk about EuroSea and the need of ocean observing and forecasting with you. And hopefully we trigger the interest of the listeners too to check out the website.
We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode and look forward to seeing you next time. You can follow the AtlantECO project on our website on www.atlanteco.eu, and you can also find us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. All the links and information on the project and on today's episode is in the show notes. AtlantECO is a project funded under Horizon 2020, a European Union research and innovation programme.